Morgan Reed squinted at the holographic display as the emerald sphere of Lumina 6060 filled the observation deck's massive viewport. The swirling Viridian atmosphere caught the light from twin yellow stars, casting an otherworldly chartreuse glow throughout the command center that reminded him of algae-rich ponds from his childhood on Earth. His fingers danced across the medical diagnostic panel, a habit he'd developed during his years of deep space assignments, always checking equipment, always prepared for the inevitable catastrophe that space travel seemed to invite, despite humanity's technological advances. "I thought the Celestial Wayfarer was supposed to have the most sophisticated navigation array in the entire Coalition fleet," he muttered to himself, running diagnostic checks on his medical equipment. Yet here we are, drifting toward an uncharted jungle moon that shouldn't even exist according to our stellar cartography. The ship shuddered violently, sending Morgan stumbling into the bulkhead, his carefully organized medical supplies scattered across the polished floor, nanite injectors rolling under consoles and tissue regenerators sliding beneath access panels. The ship's structural integrity alarm wailed, its piercing tone cutting through the sudden chaos as crew members grabbed onto whatever fixed objects they could find. "Attention all personnel." Captain Naomi Chen's voice echoed through the intercom, with the kind of artificial enthusiasm that invariably preceded disaster. "We're experiencing what our engineering team has classified as temporary navigational anomalies. Please secure all equipment and prepare for possible turbulence." From somewhere in the bowels of the ship, Chief Engineer Kostova's voice cut through the captain's announcement. "Temporary anomalies. Captain, the quantum resonance matrix is destabilizing. We're talking about total molecular disintegration in less than 5 minutes." Morgan scrambled to retrieve his scattered equipment. Neural stimulator. Got it. Cellular regenerator. Check. Emergency trauma kit. Where the hell did you go? He spotted the silver case wedged beneath the console and lunged for it, just as the ship's AI chimed in. "Warning. Unknown crystalline emanations detected from planetary surface. Electromagnetic interference patterns disrupting primary systems. Complete power failure estimated in 4 minutes, 12 seconds. "Fantastic," Morgan grumbled, securing the last components into his medical pack. Just enough time to compose a scathing review of the Coalition's unsinkable vessel design philosophy. The ship lurched again, more violently this time. For a terrifying moment, Morgan found himself floating as the artificial gravity flickered, then slammed back to the deck as systems temporarily stabilized. His stomach lurched with the sudden gravitational shift, and he tasted copper in his mouth, where he'd bitten his cheek. Around him, equipment not secured during the first impact tore free from walls and storage compartments, becoming deadly projectiles in the chaotic environment. "All personnel to evacuation vessels immediately," Captain Chen commanded, her forced optimism completely evaporated. "This is a Priority 1 evacuation order. Repeat, Priority 1 evacuation." Morgan sprinted toward his assigned escape craft, dodging panicked crew members and sparking electrical panels. The emergency lighting bathed everything in a blood-red glow, transforming familiar corridors into something from a nightmare. Crew members' faces looked demonic under the crimson illumination as they rushed with controlled desperation toward their evacuation points. He passed the ship's hydroponics bay, where plants were already withering from system failures, their leaves curling as life support faltered, a grim preview of what awaited the human occupants if they didn't evacuate quickly. He reached Escape Pod Epsilon just as the main power failed completely. Through the tiny viewport, he watched in horror as sections of the Celestial Wayfarer began breaking apart, trailing incandescent debris toward Lumina 6's verdant surface. The evacuation sequence initiated with a bone-jarring jolt that rattled his teeth. Morgan clutched his medical kit to his chest like a talisman. If he survived, those supplies might mean the difference between life and death, for himself and any other survivors. Departure sequence activated, announced the pod's rudimentary AI in a voice that sounded unnervingly cheerful. Atmospheric entry imminent. Survival probability, 68%. 68? Morgan tightened his harness straps. I've seen better odds at rigged Martian gambling dens. The jungle canopy rushed up to meet them with alarming speed. Strange aerial creatures that resembled luminous squid scattered as the pod crashed through the upper vegetation layers. Morgan caught glimpses of their translucent bodies, trailing bioluminescent tendrils that pulsed with indignant light as they fled the intrusion. The impact when they finally hit something solid was catastrophic. A cacophony of screaming metal and shattering composite materials that made Morgan wonder if the pod's survival calculations had been wildly optimistic. When the ringing in his ears subsided, he found himself suspended upside down in his safety harness, facing a jungle floor carpeted with bioluminescent fungi. Airborne spores drifted like miniature stars through shafts of emerald sunlight. The sight would have been mesmerizing if not for his precarious situation. The acrid smell of burned circuitry and emergency foam sealant filled the cramped space, making his eyes water and his throat constrict. He released the harness catch and dropped ungracefully onto what had been the pod's ceiling, wincing as his shoulder protested the awkward landing. His medical kit had survived, though it was now decorated with several impressive dents and scratches. The pod's emergency beacon pulsed weakly, its signal strength barely sufficient to penetrate the dense jungle canopy. Morgan ran a quick self-diagnostic, flexing each limb and palpating his torso for injuries, bruised ribs, minor lacerations, but nothing critical. Medical school had taught him to treat himself first. He couldn't help others if he became incapacitated. Well, Morgan addressed the empty pod. At least I'm not dying of explosive decompression in the cold vacuum of space. That's certainly something to celebrate. His emergency communicator chirped, indicating another survivor's distress signal, originating from somewhere deeper in the alien forest. Without hesitation, Morgan gathered his supplies and stepped out into the peculiar half-light of Lumina 60, where the air tasted faintly of copper and cinnamon, and the shadows seemed to shift independently of their sources. The humidity hit him immediately, a thick wall of moisture that seemed to cling to his skin and penetrate his lungs with each breath. Coalition environmental training hadn't prepared him for the sensory overload of a completely alien biosphere. Morgan had been trekking through the hallucinogenic nightmare of Lumina's jungle for exactly 18 minutes when he encountered his first brush with becoming plant food. The organism resembled an oversized pitcher plant with translucent iridescent leaves the size of serving platters and rows of crystalline formations that uncomfortably resembled teeth. It swayed slightly in a breeze that Morgan couldn't feel, as though it were sniffing the air for potential prey. "You've got to be kidding me," he sighed, carefully backing away. "I survived catastrophic spaceship failure, only to become dinner for some evolutionary accident with delusions of grandeur." The plant swayed toward him with disturbing purposefulness. Morgan noticed its movement sensors, tiny filaments that tracked his position with what seemed like malevolent intelligence. He raised his medical scanner and waved it to his right. The plant immediately lunged in that direction, its crystalline teeth making a sound like wind chimes as they snapped together. "Motion sensitive, are we?" Morgan grinned and tossed a small rock into the undergrowth to his left. The plant attacked the distraction with embarrassing eagerness, allowing him to slip past while it attempted to digest the inedible stone. The crystalline teeth scraped against the rock with a sound that set his own teeth on edge. "Thanks for the impromptu xenobotany lesson," he called over his shoulder. "Perhaps we can schedule a proper consultation when I'm not on your menu." The distress signal grew stronger as he pushed deeper into the jungle. though the terrain seemed determined to kill him with increasingly creative obstacles. Floating spores drifted past his face like bioluminescent dandelion seeds, and he quickly learned to hold his breath around them, after one briefly convinced him that his medical scanner was plotting an insurrection against him. The hallucination had been brief, but terrifying. The device's display morphing into a malevolent face that whispered secrets about the universe that no human was meant to know. Hallucinogenic defense mechanism, he muttered, giving a particularly dense cloud of spores a wide berth, because ordinary toxic spores would be too conventional for this ecological death trap. His tracker beeped more insistently as he approached a small clearing. Through a gap in the phosphorescent foliage, he spotted the mangled wreckage of another escape pod, wedged between two massive tree-like organisms with bark that pulsed with internal light. The sight made his stomach clench. The craft was crushed almost beyond recognition, its hull split and leaking emergency sealant foam. The foam bubbled and hissed as it interacted with the alien environment, creating noxious vapors that Morgan was careful to avoid breathing. "Please don't let me find only corpses," he whispered, breaking into a run despite the treacherous ground. "I didn't navigate carnivorous flora and mind-altering spores just to discover I'm completely alone on this godforsaken moon." As he approached the wreckage, he detected a sound that made his heart race: labored breathing. Someone had survived, and they needed medical attention. He activated his diagnostic scanner and aimed it at the wreckage, frowning at the biometric readings that appeared on his display. The life signs were strong, but completely unfamiliar. Rapid multiple cardiovascular rhythms, unusual neurological patterns, cellular structures unlike anything in his medical database. "That's unexpected," he murmured, studying the data. "Either my equipment is malfunctioning, or I'm about to perform emergency medicine on a distinctly non-human patient." The breathing grew more ragged, and Morgan set aside his scientific curiosity in favor of medical pragmatism. He squeezed through a jagged opening in the pod's hull, navigating past sparking circuitry and twisted metal. The confined space was disorienting, with what had been the floor now serving as a wall, and emergency lighting casting bizarre shadows that seemed to move with malevolent purpose. Inside, he found her. She was pinned beneath a collapsed section of bulkhead, her left leg clearly fractured. Her skin was a pale lavender that seemed to shimmer with an internal luminescence, and her ears, definitely not human ears, were elongated and tapered, adorned with intricate bioluminescent markings that pulsed in rhythm with her breathing. Teal-colored blood seeped from various lacerations, and her eyes, startling silver irises with vertical pupils, were wide with pain and unmistakable fear. Her features were almost human, yet with subtle differences that spoke of a completely different evolutionary path. Higher cheekbones, more pronounced brow ridge, and a slight translucency to her skin that revealed hints of circulatory structures beneath. "Hello there," Morgan said softly, kneeling beside her. "I'm Morgan. I'm a medical officer, and I'm going to help you. All right?" She stared at him with those impossible eyes, and when she spoke, her voice was melodic despite the strain. "Human." "Guilty as charged," he replied, already assessing her injuries with his scanner. "Though I prefer extraordinarily skilled medical professional who survived certain death only to find himself in an even more improbable situation." That earned him something resembling a smile. "Niara," she said, "Sentinel of the Lysithian Conclave. Pleased to meet you, Niara. Now I need you to remain very still while I determine how to extract you from this predicament without exacerbating your injuries." He began removing instruments from his kit. "Fair warning, I've never treated a Lysithian before, so if you spontaneously develop bioluminescence or sprout additional appendages, please inform me, whether that's normal or cause for concern." This time her smile was more distinct, though strained. No additional appendages. Luminescence, sometimes. Morgan raised an eyebrow as he prepared a portable stabilization field. Please tell me it's not the imminent cellular meltdown variety of glowing. Emotional response, she explained, wincing as he began working to free her trapped leg. Stress, pain, fear. So essentially, I'll have a living mood indicator. That should simplify diagnosis considerably. He positioned his tools with practiced precision. This will be uncomfortable, but I need to stabilize the fracture before attempting to move you. As he worked, Nyara suddenly reached out and grasped his hand with surprising strength. Her grip was almost painfully tight, and her silver eyes locked onto his with an intensity that made him pause. Her skin was unexpectedly warm, almost feverish by human standards, and he could feel a subtle vibration beneath her skin, perhaps related to her multiple cardiovascular systems. "Don't abandon me," she whispered, and something in her voice made his chest constrict uncomfortably. There was raw vulnerability there, a desperate need for connection that transcended species barriers. "I'm not going anywhere," he promised, though her unyielding grip made continuing his work challenging. Though I should mention, this is undoubtedly the most interesting patient interaction I've experienced. Usually, people just complain about my inappropriate timing for humor. She didn't laugh, but her grip relaxed marginally. Around them, the alien jungle pulsed with exotic life, and Morgan realized that whatever happened next, this rescue operation was going to be considerably more complicated than standard medical protocol had prepared him for. The sound of the jungle intensified as the darkness approached. Clicks, whistles, and trilling sounds that suggested nocturnal creatures awakening. Something large moved through the underbrush nearby, causing vibrations that Morgan could feel through the pod's damaged hull. Extracting Nyara from the wreckage required more engineering than medicine, and Morgan found himself grateful for the structural mechanics courses he'd barely paid attention to during his medical training. If Professor Kaplan could see him now, applying theoretical stress calculations to alien wreckage while treating a non-human patient, she might finally forgive him for sleeping through most of her lectures. "Here's our strategy," he explained, constructing an improvised leverage system from salvaged pod components and emergency cables. "I'll elevate this debris just enough for you to slide free. Consider it a highly unorthodox, potentially catastrophic mechanical solution to an otherwise straightforward medical problem." Nyara's grip on his hand tightened reflexively. "Your humor is peculiar." "Peculiar good or peculiar concerning?" he asked, testing the tension on his makeshift pulley system. The cables groaned under the strain, and for a moment, he thought the entire arrangement might collapse. "Peculiar, reassuring," she replied, her skin briefly illuminating with a soft golden glow that cast dancing shadows on the twisted metal surrounding them. "See? Luminescence. I told you that would happen." He positioned himself at the lever. "On the count of 3. 1, 2, wait, do Lysithians count the same way humans do? What if your 3 is our 17? Morgan." Her voice was patient, despite her obvious pain. "Standard numerical sequence, please." "Right. Okay. 1, 2, 3. He threw his weight against the lever, and the debris shifted with an agonizing screech of tortured metal. Nyara pulled herself free with remarkable coordination, though she couldn't suppress a gasp of pain as her injured leg dragged across the pod's floor. Morgan noticed her impressive upper body strength. Clearly, the Lysithians had evolved for environments that required greater physical capability than standard Earth gravity. "I'm clear," she panted, and immediately her hand found his again. "Thank you." Morgan knelt beside her, medical scanner in his free hand. "Don't express gratitude prematurely. I still need to properly set this fracture, and I'm working with equipment calibrated for human physiology. For all I know, Lysithian skeletal structures are composed of crystallized moonlight and philosophical concepts. Calcium silicate matrix, she said with what might have been amusement. Similar to human bone composition, but more dense and elastic. Of course it is, he muttered, assembling his bone fusion device. Because standard brittle bones would be far too straightforward. Next, you'll inform me that you possess multiple cardiovascular systems or some equally inconvenient anatomical variation. 4 circulatory nodes, actually, she said. And this time her amusement was unmistakable, despite her obvious discomfort. The bioluminescent patterns on her skin shifted subtly, creating complex geometric designs that seemed to reflect her emotional state. Morgan paused, fusion injector halfway to her leg. I beg your pardon? 4 circulatory nodes. Primary for core functions, secondary for extremities, tertiary for neural enhancement, quaternary for emergency reserve. 4 hearts? Morgan shook his head and resumed his work. I'm a field medic, not a xenocardiac specialist. I barely understand how to maintain 1 heart, let alone a quartet. Though it certainly explains your remarkable consciousness after such significant blood loss. Any human would have been unconscious long ago. As he worked to stabilize her leg, Nayara began speaking, her voice growing softer and more distant. My homeworld, Lysithea Prime, was established as a mining outpost initially. We were laborers, not citizens. Sounds challenging, Morgan commented, carefully aligning the bone fragments with sonic precision. The bone fusion device hummed softly as it worked, emitting a blue glow that mixed with Nayara's natural bioluminescence to create eerie patterns on the pod's interior surfaces. Humans required our physiological resilience, our capacity to function in these toxic atmospheres, she continued, her grip on his hand tightening. They classified us as utilitarian xenomorphs, never as people, never as equals. Morgan felt a surge of shame at humanity's treatment of her species. It was an old story, repeated countless times throughout human history. Exploitation justified by perceived otherness. The denial of basic dignity to those deemed different. He'd seen it in medical care disparities, even in the supposedly enlightened coalition. When the subsurface habitats collapsed, she whispered, the human administrators sealed the emergency exits, prioritized evacuation of their own species. Morgan's hands paused momentarily. How many? 17,412, she replied, her voice barely audible. Including my genetic progenitors. My bond sister. I was off-world undergoing sentinel training. I returned to find emptiness, where my community had once thrived. The magnitude of the tragedy silenced him. His own losses seemed trivial by comparison. A failed relationship, distant parents, the usual disappointing trajectory of a life spent more in space than on any planet. I'm sorry, he said, resuming his work with renewed focus. For what it's worth, not all humans align with that philosophy. I know. She squeezed his hand. You could have prioritized searching for other human survivors. Instead, you're here, repairing my damaged limb, offering peculiar psychological comfort. Hey, my psychological comfort techniques aren't peculiar. They're strategically unconventional. He activated the bone fusion sequence, and she flinched as the device hummed to life. Besides, abandoning injured sentience violates the Interstellar Medical Ethics Code. Alcis? It's fundamentally reprehensible behavior. She laughed, actually laughed, and the sound was like crystalline wind chimes carried on a summer breeze. Fundamentally reprehensible behavior. Is that a technical medical classification? Absolutely, Morgan said with mock solemnity. It translates to conduct that would cause your ancestral matriarch profound disappointment. Ancestral matriarch, she repeated thoughtfully. We call them memory vessels. They preserve our collective experiences, transmit wisdom through generations. The bone fusion completed with a soft chime, and Morgan watched in fascination as the medical compound adapted to Nyara's alien physiology, forming a perfect bond with her calcium silicate skeletal structure. It was a testament to the device's adaptive capabilities, or perhaps just extraordinary luck. "What would your memory vessel think of you trusting a human?" he asked, monitoring the fusion progress. The question wasn't merely conversational. He genuinely wanted to understand her perspective, her cultural framework. Nyara was silent for several moments. She would say that wisdom emerges from perceiving individuals as they demonstrate themselves to be, not as their species' historical behavior might suggest. Her silver eyes met his. "What would your ancestral matriarch think of you assisting a Lysithian?" "She'd probably ask if you have dietary restrictions and whether you are currently unattached," Morgan replied without hesitation. Gran believes most universal problems can be resolved with adequate nutrition and compatible companionship. "Perceptive woman," Nyara murmured. Her skin pulsed with a soft lavender glow that seemed to reflect a moment of genuine connection. "The most perceptive." He completed the bone fusion and began wrapping her leg with biosynthetic bandages. "There. You won't be participating in any interstellar marathons immediately, but ambulation should be possible." Nyara tested her leg cautiously, then looked up at him with those extraordinary eyes. "You preserved my existence." "A fractured limb. Hardly the stuff of heroic epics," he said, repacking his equipment. But as he tried to withdraw his hand, she maintained her grip. "Nyara, I require both hands to—" "Don't release your grasp." Her voice was suddenly small, almost fragile. "Not yet." Something in her tone made him pause. Her grip wasn't merely about physical comfort or gratitude anymore. There was something deeper, something that created an unfamiliar tightness in his chest that had nothing to do with Lumina 360's atmospheric composition. The medical part of his brain wondered if it was some kind of biochemical response to alien pheromones. But the human part, the part that recognized connection, regardless of species, knew better. "All right," he said quietly, "I won't let go." As Lumina's twin suns descended toward the horizon, the jungle transformed into something resembling an immersive light installation designed by a bioluminescent artist with a flair for the dramatic. Every leaf, every insect-like creature, every drop of moisture seemed to emit its own unique spectral signature. Morgan had constructed a makeshift shelter from pod debris and emergency thermal sheets, though calling it a shelter was generous. It more closely resembled a child's improvised fort, constructed with access to aerospace materials. 5 stars for structural integrity, he said, testing one of the support beams, minus several thousand for aesthetic appeal. Net result, accommodations that scream, desperate human attempted his best under impossible circumstances. Nyara, still maintaining her grip on his hand, laughed softly. "On Lysithea Prime, we inhabited subterranean cavern networks. Functional necessity superseded aesthetic considerations." "Then this should feel like a luxury resort," he replied, settling beside her. Their linked hands rested between them. Complete with ambient illumination, courtesy of the local flora, and a symphony performed by whatever those things are. The creatures in question were producing an elaborate composition of sounds that ranged from melodic trilling to what resembled liquid crystal being poured over resonant metal. The soundscape shifted constantly, following patterns that seemed almost mathematical in their complexity. Nyara tilted her head, listening intently. "Lumina sprites," she explained. "They're harmless. Actually quite beautiful in daylight, like animated gemstones with diaphanous wings." "Naturally," Morgan sighed, "because this place absolutely required additional life forms that are simultaneously breathtaking and completely alien." He extracted a nutrient concentrate from his kit and offered her half. Dinner is served. Fair warning. It tastes approximately like processed cellulose, with notes of crushed aspiration. She accepted the ration, but made no move to consume it. Instead, she stared at their joined hands with an expression that was part wonder, part concern. The bioluminescent patterns on her skin had formed intricate spirals that seemed to flow toward the point where their hands connected. "Morgan," she said carefully, "there's something I should explain about my species, about what's occurring between us. If you're about to inform me that hand-holding constitutes some form of Lysithian matrimonial ritual, I'm going to require substantially stronger refreshment than recycled water." "Not matrimonial," she clarified, though her skin flickered briefly with a rose-colored luminescence that spread up her arm in delicate patterns. "Neural synchronization. It occurs during periods of extreme psychological stress when we're vulnerable. Our nervous systems extend connection pathways, seeking stabilization." Morgan blinked. "You're suggesting that your neural network is literally interfacing with mine, like some form of biological quantum entanglement." "That's surprisingly accurate, as analogies go." She squeezed his hand. "I can perceive your emotional states, access fragments of memories, sense your genuine concern for my well-being, despite our brief acquaintance." The scientific implications were staggering. Cross-species neural communication had been theorized but never documented. If what she described was accurate, they were experiencing something unprecedented in the annals of xenobiology. "That's either remarkably intimate or a significant privacy violation," he said, studying her face closely. "I'm choosing intimate because it sounds considerably less alarming. What else can you perceive?" "Isolation," she said softly. "Profound solitude and dedication. You selected medical practice because you genuinely wished to alleviate suffering, not for status or compensation." Her accuracy was unnerving. He'd never spoken to anyone about his motivations for entering medicine. Not his colleagues, not his family, not even the partners who had briefly shared his life before the vastness of space and his dedication to his work had driven them away. "Accurate assessment, though the compensation would have been welcome," he admitted. "What about you? What are you experiencing?" "Terror," she confessed. "Not of mortality, but of solitude, of losing this unexpected connection we've established." The vulnerability in her admission created a resonance within him that felt almost physical, a vibration at the cellular level that transcended mere empathy. Perhaps this was the neural synchronization she had described, his human physiology adapting to the alien connection in ways he couldn't fully comprehend. Their moment of vulnerability was interrupted by a sound that made them both freeze, a keening wail that seemed to originate from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. The bioluminescent vegetation surrounding them began to dim, as if sensing approaching danger. "Please tell me that's just the jungle's nocturnal lullaby," Morgan said, though he was already reaching for his medical scanner. The device's readings spiked with unusual energy signatures, converging on their position. "Void hunters," Niara whispered, her grip on his hand becoming painful. "They emerge at night, attracted to bioelectric fields." "Bioelectric fields?" Morgan checked his scanner and swore quietly. "You mean like those generated by living organisms?" "Precisely. But humans produce relatively weak signatures. Lysithians." She gestured to herself, and he could see her skin beginning to pulse with nervous luminescence. "We might as well be broadcasting emergency signals across the entire electromagnetic spectrum." The keening grew closer, and Morgan could discern shapes moving in the darkness beyond their shelter. Fluid, shifting forms that seemed to absorb ambient light rather than reflect it. They moved with predatory grace, flowing like living shadows between the bioluminescent plants that dimmed further in their presence. "Revised strategy," he said, extracting his emergency plasma torch. "You remain here and attempt to suppress whatever internal light show you are generating. I'll create a diversion." "No!" Nyara seized the torch from his hands. "I won't allow you to endanger yourself for me." Before Morgan could protest, she was moving, ignoring her injured leg, as she stepped beyond the shelter's boundaries. The Void Hunters converged on her position, like animate darkness, and she met them with controlled bursts of plasma energy that transformed the night into a strobing spectacle of light and shadow. Her movements were fluid despite her injury, suggesting combat training beyond what he would expect from a sentinel or scout. "Consider this your eviction notice, you photophobic nightmares," she shouted, her injured leg buckling as she struggled to maintain her balance. "I've survived significantly worse circumstances than this." Morgan watched in astonishment as she drove back the creatures with a combination of plasma fire and what appeared to be sheer determination. The Void Hunters recoiled from the concentrated light, their amorphous forms dissipating like smoke where the plasma energy struck them directly. When the last of the shadows retreated into the jungle depths, she limped back to the shelter and immediately reached for his hand again. Her skin was feverishly hot to the touch, and her breathing was rapid from exertion, but her expression held triumphant satisfaction. "That," he said, "was either the most courageous or most foolhardy display I've ever witnessed." "Both," she admitted, settling beside him with obvious discomfort. "Unquestionably both." He ran his scanner over her leg, relieved to find that the bone fusion had held despite her acrobatics. "You've aggravated the soft tissue damage, but the structural repair remains intact. Impressive engineering on my part, if I do say so myself." As their hands reconnected, Morgan felt something new flowing between them. Not merely her emotions, but a sense of partnership, of shared purpose. The neural synchronization was deepening, and surprisingly, he discovered he welcomed it. It wasn't the invasion of privacy he might have expected, but rather an expansion of consciousness, as though he suddenly had access to additional sensory input, a new way of perceiving reality. "So," he asked, "what's the protocol for this situation? Should I formally meet your ancestral lineage, or is neural compatibility sufficient?" She laughed, and the sound resonated like coming home after a long absence. "My lineage is extinct, remember?" "Right. Then I suppose I'll have to become acquainted with you through traditional methods." He smiled. "Fair warning, I'm frequently described as an acquired preference." "Excellent," she said, her skin glowing softly in the shelter's dim interior. "I prefer experiences that justify the investment of effort." Through their neural connection, Morgan felt her sincerity, and something else, a tentative hope that seemed at odds with her traumatic history. Perhaps that was the true miracle of consciousness, he reflected, the capacity to continue reaching toward connection, despite past wounds. It was a trait that transcended species, a fundamental aspect of sentient life that made his medical mission worthwhile. As they sat in companionable silence, the neural synchronization deepened further. Morgan began to perceive fragments of Nyara's memories, the crystal caverns of her childhood home, the complex harmonics of Lysithian music that human ears could never fully appreciate, the joy of soaring through the low-gravity training chambers during her sentinel preparation. These impressions came not as invasive thoughts, but as natural extensions of his own consciousness, expanding his understanding of her experience without diminishing his sense of self. "This neural link," he said softly, "it's extraordinary. I can perceive aspects of your existence that would be impossible to communicate through language alone." Nyara nodded. "It was an evolutionary adaptation for our species, a way to share complex information rapidly during crisis situations. We never anticipated it could function across species boundaries, probably because most humans would run screaming at the prospect of alien neural connectivity," Morgan said wryly. We tend to be rather protective of our mental autonomy. Yet you're not running, she observed. I'm a medical professional. Scientific curiosity outweighs self-preservation instinct. It's practically a job requirement. But they both knew, through their deepening connection, that his reasons went beyond professional interest. Dawn on Lumina 660 brought two concerning developments. Nayara's leg had developed significant swelling, despite the bone fusion, and her skin had acquired an alarming greenish tinge that clearly wasn't part of her normal coloration. The bioluminescent patterns had become sluggish and irregular, suggesting some form of systemic disruption. Well, Morgan said, reviewing his medical scanner readings for the third time. This is what we in the medical profession classify as deeply suboptimal. Your clinical communication skills require refinement, Nayara observed, though her voice was strained. What's your assessment, physician? Inflammatory response. Your physiology is rejecting the human medical compounds I administered. He frowned at the scanner output. It's like attempting to repair quantum circuitry with Paleolithic tools, theoretically possible, but profoundly inadvisable. Nayara's grip on his hand tightened. What's my prognosis? Let's avoid dramatic conclusions. You're not terminal. You're simply biologically incompatible with my life-preserving interventions. He began examining the contents of his medical kit. Fortunately, I paid attention during xenobiology instruction. Unfortunately, I primarily focused on sections covering interspecies communication challenges. Naturally you did, she said, managing a smile despite her evident discomfort. It seemed potentially relevant at the time, he defended himself. You never know when you might accidentally propose lifetime partnership to a Centaurian by sneezing in their direction. He held up a bioluminescent plant that pulsed with soft azure light. But I also recall fundamentals of adaptive pharmaceutical techniques. Indigenous flora often contains compounds compatible with native physiologies. You intend to treat me with alien vegetation? She asked skeptically. I prefer locally sourced organic therapeutic agents, he corrected. Besides, human medicine has utilized plant-derived compounds for millennia. We simply package them attractively and charge exorbitant prices. Working together, they began cataloging the jungle's medicinal properties. Nayara's knowledge of Lasithian biochemistry, combined with Morgan's medical training, created an unlikely but effective research partnership. She would identify plants that resonated with her physiology, while he analyzed their chemical composition and potential therapeutic applications. Through their neural link, the process was remarkably efficient, her intuitive understanding guiding his scientific analysis in a perfect synthesis of their respective strengths. This specimen, she said, indicating a vine that glistened with crystalline sap. It feels harmonious, like it's resonating in synchronization with my nervous system. Resonating? Morgan raised an eyebrow. That's either poetically descriptive or medically concerning. Possibly both. The neural bond, she explained, her skin flickering with soft golden luminescence. It's intensifying. I can perceive the biochemical signatures of surrounding organisms. Through our connection, I can access your thought patterns, your experiential memories. All of them? Morgan asked, suddenly self-conscious. There were aspects of his past, failed relationships, professional missteps, embarrassing academy incidents, that he preferred to keep private. Surface impressions, your commitment to healing, your solitude, your peculiar humor. She paused. Your genuine compassion for others, regardless of species classification. It's uncommon among humans. Thank you. I think. He extracted the vine's sap and began synthesizing a treatment. The process was delicate, requiring precise calibration of the indigenous compounds to match Nayara's unique physiology. Through their neural connection, He could sense which molecular configurations would be most effective, guiding his preparation with unprecedented precision. What else can you perceive? Apprehension, she said quietly. You fear losing connections. It's why you became a medical practitioner, isn't it? You couldn't save someone significant to you. Morgan's hands stilled momentarily. The memory surfaced unbidden. His younger brother trapped in the wreckage of a transit accident. Morgan holding his hand as life slowly ebbed away. Medical services arriving too late to prevent the inevitable. My younger sibling. Transport accident when I was 17. I held their hand during emergency evacuation, but couldn't provide meaningful assistance. He resumed his work. I committed myself to never experiencing that helplessness again. And now you fear losing me, she said. Not a question. Perhaps. Is that what this neural bond accomplishes? Creates emotional interdependence. Sometimes, she admitted. But it also reveals authentic connection. The fundamental reason I maintain physical contact. She squeezed his fingers. I've existed in isolation since my community perished, Morgan. I've maintained emotional distance from everyone. But you perceive me as a sentient individual, not merely an alien classification to be utilized or feared. Difficult to fear someone who critiques my psychological support techniques, he said, preparing the injection. This might cause discomfort. Everything causes discomfort, she said simply. But for the first time in years, I'm not experiencing it in isolation. The synthesized treatment proved more effective than either had anticipated. Within hours, the inflammation receded, and Nyara's natural lavender coloration returned. The bioluminescent patterns resumed their normal rhythm, flowing across her skin in complex, healthy patterns. Morgan monitored her vital signs with his scanner, relieved to see all 4 circulatory nodes functioning at optimal capacity. As they sat together in their makeshift shelter, Morgan realized that the neural synchronization had fundamentally changed him. He perceived the jungle differently now, not merely as a collection of alien organisms, but as an interconnected system of life, each component responding to the others in a delicate dance of survival. Through Nyara's neurological perspective, he understood the jungle's rhythms and patterns in ways that human sensory apparatus could never detect. Their shared consciousness had created something unique, neither fully human nor fully Lysithian, but a hybrid perspective that transcended both. It was beautiful and terrifying, intimate and overwhelming, and he knew, with absolute certainty, that he could never return to his former perception of reality. The sound of approaching propulsion systems cut through the jungle's ambient noise, and they looked up to see a rescue craft breaking through the canopy. The sight should have elicited celebration, but Nyara's grip on his hand became desperate. "They've located us," she said, panic evident in her voice. "That's generally the purpose of rescue operations," Morgan replied, though he felt his own anxiety spike through their connection. "You don't understand. Once we return to regulated space, there will be protocols, directives." Her skin began to pulse with rapid, frightened luminescence. "My governance will demand to study this neural synchronization. Your administration will attempt to prevent it. They'll separate us." The rescue craft touched down in a nearby clearing, and Morgan could see the mixed crew of humans and Lysithians disembarking. Official rescue personnel, official procedures, official methods of maintaining different species within appropriate boundaries. Their uniforms were pristine, their movements precise and professional. A stark contrast to Morgan and Nyara's disheveled appearance and improvised survival techniques. "What if separation isn't my preference?" he asked quietly. "What?" "You heard me. What if I wish to maintain this connection?" He smiled, though his pulse had accelerated. "I've become accustomed to the bioluminescence. It's like having a personalized emotional indicator that happens to be the most fascinating individual I've ever encountered." "Morgan, I'm being serious." "As am I. This bond, this connection between us, it's not merely alien neurology or stress response. It's something authentic. Through their neural link, he shared his absolute conviction, letting her feel the depth of his commitment, beyond what words could express. He squeezed her hand, something worth defending. The rescue team was approaching, their voices carrying through the jungle atmosphere. Soon they would be discovered, evaluated, debriefed, and processed back into their separate existences. But as Morgan looked into Niara's extraordinary eyes, he knew that conventional boundaries had become meaningless. They had experienced something profound together, something that transcended standard classifications and protocols. "What are you suggesting?" Niara asked. "I'm suggesting," Morgan said, helping her to her feet, "that the universe possesses a peculiar sense of irony after all. And perhaps, just perhaps, it's finally decided to be ironic in our favor." Hand in hand, they walked toward their rescuers and whatever awaited them next. Through their neural connection, Morgan felt Niara's fear begin to recede, replaced by determination that matched his own. Whatever challenges they faced, they would face them together. Two individuals from different worlds who had found something extraordinary in the most unlikely circumstances. The rescue team found them exactly where expected, sitting together on a fallen tree-like organism, hands intertwined, resembling two individuals who had pragmatically adapted to adverse circumstances. What they hadn't anticipated was the soft, steady luminescence emanating from Niara's skin, or her visible distress whenever someone suggested they might require separate medical evaluation. Each time the human and Lysathian medical officers attempted to separate them for individual assessment, the bioluminescent patterns on Niara's skin would flare with obvious distress, and Morgan would experience a disorienting sense of cognitive disruption. "Standard protocol," explained Commander Ishida. A stern human woman with an expression suggesting she'd encountered everything the universe could present and remained thoroughly unimpressed. Independent medical assessment, debriefing, then transport to your respective assignments. "Regarding that," Morgan said, maintaining his grip on Niara's hand, "I'd like to request reassignment." "Reassignment?" Ishida raised an eyebrow. "You just survived catastrophic planetfall on an uncharted biosphere. Perhaps we should prioritize proper medical evaluation before discussing career adjustments." "I am proper medical evaluation," Morgan replied with a grin. "Ask her. I repaired her fractured limb, synthesized xenobiotic antibiotics, and only subjected her to moderately inappropriate humor throughout the ordeal. That surely merits consideration." Dr. Zoltan, the Lysathian medical officer, was studying his scanner with obvious cognition. The device emitted a series of high-pitched tones as it processes the unprecedented readings. The neural synchronization readings are unprecedented. This depth of connection typically requires decades to develop, yet you've achieved it in less than 48 hours. "We're exceptionally efficient," Niara said, her skin flickering with nervous humor. "Additionally, life-threatening circumstances tend to accelerate interpersonal familiarization. This situation is highly irregular," Ishida stated, though her tone had shifted from stern to merely concerned. "Cross-species neural bonding isn't simply a medical curiosity, it's politically sensitive. There are protocols, procedures, evaluation committees that must review." "Commander," Morgan interrupted, "with all respect, your protocols didn't crash land on a hostile moon with a fractured limb and carnivorous flora. Sometimes the universe presents more elegant solutions than our administrative frameworks." The rescue team exchanged meaningful glances. Through their bond, Morgan could feel Niara's mounting anxiety regarding their imminent future. The shuttle's medical compartment, with its sterile barriers and separate treatment areas, loomed in both their minds like a prison, designed to keep them permanently apart. The neural synchronization had progressed to the point where even brief separation would cause significant neurological distress for both of them, a fact that the medical scanners were clearly detecting, despite the rescue team's limited understanding of the phenomenon. "I have a proposal," Morgan said, addressing both Ishida and Dr. Zalton. "The Interspecies Medical Exchange Program has been seeking human volunteers for cross-species treatment protocol research. I volunteer." Ishida frowned. "That's a 3-year commitment to a non-human world." "I'm aware. I've also just accumulated more practical knowledge regarding interspecies medicine than most practitioners acquire throughout their entire careers." He squeezed Nyara's hand. "Additionally, I believe I've discovered my specialization." Dr. Zalton's expression was unreadable. "The neural synchronization will make separation extremely difficult, potentially traumatic." "What if separation isn't our objective?" Nyara asked quietly. "What if we prefer to explore the potential of this unexpected connection? Two individuals from different worlds choosing to construct something meaningful together." The rescue team remained silent for several moments. Finally, Ishida sighed. "The administrative documentation alone will be nightmarish." "I'll assist," Morgan offered. "I have exceptional penmanship and significant tolerance for bureaucratic complexities." "That's hardly a medical qualification," Ishida said, though her expression had softened almost imperceptibly. "Are you serious? Have you reviewed medical certification applications? Bureaucratic tolerance is practically a prerequisite." 3 weeks later, Morgan stood in the research laboratory of the Lasithian Science Station, orbiting Lumina 60, watching Nyara adapt to her new position as xenobiology liaison. Her leg had healed completely, though she still unconsciously reached for his hand whenever she was concentrating intensely. The neural synchronization had stabilized into something truly remarkable, a permanent bridge between human and Lysithian consciousness that allowed them to function as an extraordinarily effective research team. The Coalition and Lysithian Conclave had initially been skeptical about their connection, but the potential scientific and diplomatic benefits had eventually outweighed bureaucratic resistance. They had become, somewhat reluctantly, on the part of both governments, the living embodiment of interspecies cooperation, a case study in what was possible when artificial barriers were transcended. "How are the neural synchronization studies progressing?" she asked, not looking up from her data display. Her slender fingers manipulated the holographic interface with practiced precision, sorting through the accumulating research data on their unique connection. "Fascinating," he replied, settling beside her. "Apparently, our situation isn't merely uncommon. It's revolutionary. The research team believes we've inadvertently discovered an entirely new form of interspecies communication." Through their neural link, he could sense her satisfaction with this development. The connection had evolved beyond simple emotional sharing to include complex conceptual exchange, ideas flowing between them with unprecedented clarity and nuance. "Inadvertently," she repeated, finally looking at him. "Is that our official terminology? Would you prefer discovered through a series of fortunate catastrophes involving spaceship failure and emergency xenomedicine?" "Much better," she said, her skin glowing with contentment. "More accurate." Through the observation port, they could see Lumina 60 rotating slowly beneath them, its bioluminescent jungles pulsing with exotic life. From orbital distance, it appeared peaceful, even beautiful. Difficult to believe it had nearly claimed both their lives. Yet without that near catastrophe, without the desperate circumstances that had forced them together, they would never have discovered the potential that existed between their species. "Any regrets?" Morgan asked. Nyara considered the question seriously. "About the crash, the injuries, the photophobic predators that attempted to consume you?" About this, he clarified, raising their joined hands, about choosing to build something unprecedented instead of returning to familiar territories. Never, she said without hesitation. Though I do have one complaint. What's that? Your humor truly is peculiar. Hey, my humor is improving, Morgan protested. The research team appreciated my quantum entanglement wordplay yesterday. That wasn't appreciation, Niara corrected gently. That was polite scientific confusion. Functionally identical, Morgan said, drawing her closer. Besides, you're permanently connected to me now. The neural bond won't allow you to escape my particular comedic style. I believe I can adapt to that reality, she said, her skin glowing brighter as she smiled. After all, we have the entirety of cosmic existence to refine your technique. The neural synchronization between them deepened further, their shared consciousness expanding to encompass new possibilities. They had become something that neither human nor Lysithian science had anticipated. A hybrid entity that preserved individual identity while creating something greater than the sum of its parts. It was, Morgan reflected, the most profound form of healing he had ever participated in. Not merely the repair of physical damage, but the construction of a new form of existence that transcended traditional boundaries. Outside their viewport, Lumina 360 continued its ancient orbit around its twin stars, and somewhere in its bioluminescent depths, 2 crashed escape pods were slowly being reclaimed by the alien jungle. The universe, it seemed, truly did possess a peculiar sense of irony, and occasionally it chose to be ironic in the most fortuitous way possible.